So I'm Sridhar Iyer from Education Technology, and today I'll be talking about this topic on project-based learning and how students got together to implement a project for real-life clients. So this is the team, and there were two instructors, me and Professor Shamantak Das, teaching assistants, and then there were research assistants, there were a bunch of credit students, a bunch of audit students, and some sit-through students. So this is the talk abstract, but you don't need to read this. Okay, so that was just for the purpose of announcing on seminar. What the talk is really about is that I did something atypical in a course last year, and I'm going to tell you the story of that course, what happened and why and how and so on. And if at the end you find that it was an interesting story, then our time is well spent. And if you engage in a debate and talk about can we do this and so on, it's great. And if there are some ideas that you want to take back to your course, that's even better. Okay, so the story is actually in three parts. One is I'll just do the story in brief. Then there's a section on diving into details, which we will do only if required. And then we'll discuss about how we can do similar things in other courses. So to quickly give a background, Education Technology was established in 2010 as an interdisciplinary program, for those of you who don't know. So currently we have 6 core faculty, 44 PhD students, 20 students have graduated. And like any other department in IIT, we also do research, development, outreach, consultancy, etc. So it's a full-fledged department in IIT. And one of the courses is this course called Instruction Systems Design. So the course is about getting people ready for the edtech industry as instruction designers. So they need to learn a lot about the theories of how instruction is designed, what are the various processes, what happens in the industry, what kind of goals are set and so on. And typically the course in 2023, what we had was, we had models of instruction design. So we don't need to get into the details of these models here. So they were like, fairly common models which are used in industry. Then we had instruction design frameworks. Again, so these were some models we have created, some that already exist. A lot of tools. And what we did in 2023 was to implement it in a project-based learning mode using some real-life client. Okay. So with that background, so we know that we want to do projects in practice-oriented courses. Now the problem with projects is, as many of us know, the toy projects don't sustain interest, right? And students may do it for the grade, not everyone may participate, there may be sleeping partners and so on and so forth, right? And now when we move from toy projects to real-life projects, the problem is they become challenging to execute within a course. So it becomes very challenging for students to learn the content and do a meaningful project as part of the course, because both are new to them. The content is new to them, the practices are new to them. Okay. So the key idea here is to ask this question: suppose we entice senior students also to participate who are already familiar with the content, and now we want them to participate in a different way. Okay. So the question now becomes, how do we get these students to participate in the course? So here's one answer. So the first thing to do was to find an interesting real-life project from an actual client. Okay, so in this case, it turned out that I was a member of the PWD cell. PWD stands for Persons with Disabilities. So IITB started a PWD cell in December of 2022. So of which I was a member, and January of 2023 is when we started, when this course ran. So as part of the PWD cell, one of the goals was to sensitize the population in general on needs of persons with disabilities. Okay. So given that background, now contributing to this project was naturally interesting, and attractive to ET students. Okay, so most of them come with a service-oriented and socially contributing mindset. So it was naturally attractive to these students to participate in such a course. The second thing that I did was to immerse students across diverse batches to carry out the course, okay, to carry out these projects. So senior students were enticed with new learnings, such as, you'll get to go deeper into the content, your understanding of the content improves, and other types of learning such as how to lead projects and so on. Then we made mixed groups to offset the effect of the daunting nature of a real life project. And finally, we did keep some options open to scale down the project just in case, right? Just in case it doesn't go. So we had like multiple exit points where we could have stopped the project and so on. Okay. So what did the students achieve? So in Jan 2023, in fact, this was a excerpt from the brief given to the PWD cell. Okay, so it was at this level of saying do something to create awareness. Okay, so what the students had to do was to take this and create content for this awareness. Okay? So, and this happened over a period of 3 months. So on 13th April, we reached this site. I'll just give you a quick view of this, what they built. So it included multiple stakeholder interviews, SMEs, user study, and so on. Okay. And the interesting thing was that in May, June, a few students also continued to work on this as a summer internship. And finally, we handed over the website to the PWD cell, and today it's linked from the IITB's main webpage. So what is the website? So this is the QR code in case anybody wants to take a look at it. And I'll just give you a quick walkthrough. So, so what does it contain? So it has scenario-based learning activities for different types of disabilities. So what they did was they took 4 types of disabilities. One was locomotor disability, another one was visual impairment, a third one was ADHD and learning disabilities, a fourth one was autism. So the class was divided into 4 groups, and for each group they created these scenario-based learning activities, like including a video and check your understanding or finding out prior knowledge or prior biases type of questions. And then there were sensitization videos which were created, including experiential ones, like you do an activity which actually helps you to look at things from the other person's point of view. Then they created guidelines for instructors, guidelines for students, colleagues. Then there were some posters to create awareness. There were reflection questions with feedback. I mean, after all, it was an instruction systems design course. It was not a create a website course. So there was a lot of instruction design input into that. So formative assessment and so on. And finally, the website had some inspiring stories of people with different types of disabilities talking about their achievements. So this was basically the outline of the website. So I'm not going to do a walkthrough, but we can take a look at that later. Okay. So now, before we get into how we built it, let's ask this question, was it any good? I mean, was it of any use to have done this? Okay. So what we did was, at the same students, by the end of the course, they did a usefulness and usability study with 38 participants, which were IITB students. And the findings were kind of classified along 5 dimensions. One was the ease of use. One was on how well are the modules integrated. One was on the ease of learning. One was on the interface design itself. Then there was one on is the content comprehensive enough? Is the language appropriate enough? And so on. So while this is anecdotal or a small pilot study, what we hope is that if we do a larger study, the findings are going to be kind of similar in terms of utility of the website that they have built. Okay, so having kind of given you an idea of what we did and how good it was, let's look at how we got there. Okay. So what we did was to divide the students into 3 cohorts. So there were credit students who were the first year MTechs and the first year PhDs. Then there were audit students who were some of the senior batches, second year MTechs, as well as some of the second and third year PhDs. And then there were mostly the sit-through students who were the fourth year PhDs as well as postdocs. Okay. So now in order to get all these guys into the class, so there had to be different learning objectives for each of them. So for the credit students, the objectives were the same as the course, just to go through the content, learn the content and the processes well. For the audit students, some of whom had already done this course earlier, or they knew the content already from elsewhere. So the goal was to learn to plan larger scale such projects, okay, and to mentor. So because we were in education technology, teaching is a big aspect of what we teach also. So mentoring was something that was an important thing. So they were gaining mentoring skills and how to provide scaffolds to the other learners. And for the most senior students, the goal was for them to make connections across various topics, for them to reflect on the instructor's actions, and providing mentoring support to the junior students. So that was the basic structure of the class. So they were divided into 3 cohorts, X, Y, and Z. And then there were 4 groups created. So as I mentioned, they worked on 4 different topics, right? One was autism, one was ADHD and LD, one was visual impairment, one was locomotor disability. So those were groups A, B, C, D, and the groups were made up with a mix of students. So there were 2 from the X cohort, 2, 3 from the Y cohort, and 1 from the Z cohort in each of these groups. So they were working in these mixed groups throughout the course. And what were the instructor actions? So it was a lot of orchestration. So it began with cultivating enthusiasm for the course, inviting people to come and having got them in, making sure that they don't go away, okay? And so this was done by defining benefits for all the cohorts, creating meaningful learning activities which were aligned with the course goals, scoping the project, and supporting collaboration across the cohorts, providing various roles and responsibilities to the different cohorts, giving enough autonomy to the learners, and so on. Okay, so here's a quick overview of how the work happened. So there's a lot of group work. So in this picture, you see 2 people from cohort X, 1 person from cohort Y, 1 person from cohort Z, and the person sitting right at the background is the observer. So there was also an observer in every group who was actually observing what was going on in order to collect data for the research studies that we were doing around it. And what were their roles? So like we had these 3 cohorts, X, Y, and Z. So the role of X was to basically learn the technical concept. The role of Y was to mentor X in applying their ideas using their own prior knowledge. And the role of Z was to provide broad direction to everyone, right? Without trusting their own ideas. That's also an important goal. That normally otherwise in a large project, usually it's the senior person who says, let's do this, and all the junior persons just wind up doing that. Okay, so that we ensured that that didn't happen. And then we had a bunch of focus questions to drive this collaboration. So it began with, at the broadest level, it was like who are the stakeholders who are involved and what are their roles, going all the way to, create the training resources and plan a usefulness and usability study. So many of the classes were actually, so we had a 3-hour class slot instead of the 1.5 hour slot. So we had a 3-hour class slot. And many of the classes were actually students doing this group work with some interventions on content and practices. Okay. So this is the project timeline. This is basically how we went about it. So in January, we started off with meeting the client. Okay, so the client is the convener of the PWD cell. So this is Professor Swati Pal from IDC. And In that meeting, the students got to understand, what are the needs for this PWD cell, what kind of training resources need to be created, and so on. Okay, so there was some kind of a needs analysis that happened at that time. Then in February, what we did was to conduct a sensitization workshop. Okay, so this is not a topic on which we have internal expertise, and this is very common for instruction designers, that they're expected to create materials on topics on which they don't have inherent expertise. So the typical process followed is that you have to work with a subject matter expert. So that's called an SME. So you work with a subject matter expert to understand the subject and help the SME to create the instruction. Okay. So in this case, there was an NGO called Umeed which worked with children with developmental disabilities. So we had an interaction with them. This was again a longish workshop which they came and did for us, and they got us to experience what it feels to be a person with disability. They sensitized us to the whole thing, and they also gave us ideas on which aspects of the project that we should focus on. Okay. We also interacted with some students with disabilities to get to know their perspective on what we should focus on, what should their colleagues be told, and so on. Okay. So after all this, what we zeroed down on is that the most important thing to do is to generate awareness. Okay, so the most important thing to do is not directly to jump into giving solutions, but the first thing that we need to do is to generate awareness in the population. And so what we decided was that we'll do this website around the scope of the website training program became awareness. Then after we did one round of design, we got some feedback from some design experts. This is again a PhD student from IDC. So he also happens to be part of the PWD cell. So he was able to give us feedback on the design of the website, what should go in, what should not be there, what should be the look and feel of the website. And then by April, like I said, they had finished creating the training materials, and we did a demo. So where again we had feedback from the subject matter experts, feedback from instruction design experts, as well as feedback from design experts and feedback from the client. So the last row, which is Karan and Professor Swatipal, had both the roles of being design experts as well as clients. Okay, so that's what we did in April. And then in May, the PWD cell actually offered an internship. So 5 students took up this. They went ahead to do this internship, where some of this material was cleaned up, new videos were created, they were made into good form, and finally we released it sometime in June. Okay, and since then there have been like a bunch of people have written papers about what their experience was, as well as how much engagement was, and so on. Okay, so now that I have been talking for a while, let's take a small pause for me to breathe and you to think. So now that you have an idea of this course, what all learning might have happened in the course? Anybody can say? First, yes. Make a guess.
Major learning is about disability.
Major learning would be about disability. Okay.
Sensitization of students regarding the PWD.
Okay, sensitization. So the learning for the students. So Sunny and a few others were there in the course, Arjun and all. So what did they learn? What do you think they would have learned?
Problem solving they would have tried.
Problem solving. Okay.
So in this particular case, if you're not an expert on something, so you learn to talk to the...
They would have learned to talk to the expert. Yes, that's very important. Yeah.
How to implement the concepts which they already have studied in their previous years.
Okay, how to implement the concepts that they've already studied. Okay.
Interaction with the disabilities and then understanding that they are not alone.
Okay, interaction with people with disabilities and understanding that they are not alone. Okay, so that's kind of a broad range of answers, and that's sort of what we saw. Okay, so we did a bunch of research studies around this, and there are detailed studies on, how much interest was there, how much learning happened, how much engagement was there in the class, did students have enough agency, what's the role of. So this course also ran in a hybrid mode because many of our students are college teachers elsewhere in the country, so they also participated. Okay, and then there are also what's the social emotional learning that has happened, so on. But I'll just give you a few quotes. I won't go into details of all these studies for now. So these are basically some quotes from the students themselves. So they fall under 4 broad buckets. So one is the content itself. So they are learning about the ISD concepts, like the various models that they've learned. They learned how to create these scenarios. They learned the new tools. Okay. Then they learned the processes, like you mentioned, that they learned how to interview people. They learned how to talk to SMEs. They learned the importance of review and feedback. So these are not my statements, these are their statements. And they talked about collaboration, working within a group. We can get different points of view. And this, as many of you pointed out, they also learned to develop empathy. So the interesting thing that we also found was they developed empathy not only towards the PWD students, but also towards their colleagues. So that was an interesting finding. Okay, so I'll just quickly talk about few of the other ideas. Okay, so the natural question that arises in an instructor's mind is that, was there sustained engagement? Were they able to stay with the course throughout? Okay, so again we did a study. So it's known that instructors have to continually adapt to maintain engagement of students. And what we found is that doing project-based learning with this real-life project and a cross-cohort approach was useful for sustaining engagement. Okay? So this was done by semi-structured interviews, observation data, video recordings, asking open-ended questions, asking survey questions. Okay. And as one important point of evidence is actually this thing called Homework Zero. Okay, so Homework Zero was actually a journal which they maintained. Every student, it was a shared journal which all the students maintained after every class. So after every class, students would write their reflections in this journal, which was basically a Google Doc. Okay. And what they learned, what they felt, and others would also respond to it. So I would also respond to it. Often it would be at 4 a.m. Getting ready for the next class, responding to students' points on the Homework Zero. And now this was a purely voluntary activity. There was no marks for it. There was absolutely no credit for doing this activity. Okay. And what we found was that out of 26 learners, there were 125 reflections, considerable word count of nearly 27,000, expressing a lot of thoughtful reflections and emphasizing their engagement with the course. That was our finding. See, the other thing that this served was as a means of revision for students who missed the class. So many students have said that, look, this kind of a journal was very useful for us to know what others are thinking, what others have learned. So this peer learning was very easily facilitated through a simple mechanism of having a shared Google Doc in which everybody write. Okay, so, okay, was there sustained interest? So there is a slight difference between engagement and interest. Okay, engagement is, are they with you? And you can ensure that in many ways, but interest is a different construct. So the interest was, again, are they really interested in staying with this or continuing to do this? So once again, what we found was that the social nature of the project, the service learning, so this goes under the term called service learning. So because it was oriented with a service-based project, that helped them maintain an interest and a moral responsibility at a high level. Okay, so normally what you would expect to find is attrition as the course progresses, right? So we are all used to full attendance on day one and 20% attendance on one day before the end sems. So that did not happen because students felt a moral responsibility. So they said that, look, if we have committed to build this, we will build it. So that was actually the reason for sustaining the interest. And then the question arises, what about agency? Agency means the freedom for each student to express themselves and not have to do what they are being told to do. So since this was a multi-cohort class, there were students across seniors and juniors and the ones who are doing the course. So there's always this risk that low achievers or even junior students will become passive. So they'll just do what they're told. Okay. So we found that this did not happen. Both the X and the Y cohort students displayed a high sense of agency while designing these modules. Okay. And these are some of the dimensions on which we did the measurements, contribution, ownership, confidence, and control, and found that it was pretty high for the most part. Okay. So the structure of the course, including senior students and telling them that it's not that you take the decisions and direct the junior students, but you help the junior students to carry out the project, that was actually useful to maintain this agency. Okay, so now what was the effect of having multiple cohorts? So we had so many different students in the class. So cohort X felt that interactions including senior students and postdocs contributed to the discussions. Okay, so they felt that discussions are fruitful, but cross-cohort discussions leads to more learning, because often one of them would chime in. So they were kind of additional instructors that became available to me in the class. So it was not that I was the only instructor. So there were many others who were contributing to the discussion, and the cohort X was able to learn from almost all of that. So for cohort Y, it was kind of a revision. So it brings specific dialogues or conversations from different places and time, and courses that they participated in, they didn't participate. So getting deeper into the knowledge and being able to contribute something meaningful to the larger effort. That's what the cohort Y experienced. And cohort Z, they many of them actually reported that interacting with juniors make me reflect on my own prior knowledge more deeply. So even though I am already an expert on this topic, being in this and somebody asking me, okay, exactly where in ID is this happening, or where exactly are we doing that? So we always know that the best way to learn is to teach, and that is something which the cohort Z guys experienced. Okay, so to just broadly sum up at this point, for students, the course outcomes were content learning, practices learning. This was the important part of the thing, because this is an industry topic. So the learning of the practices is as important as learning of the content topics. There was social emotional learning, where there was PWD awareness, empathy, teamwork experience. So they actually built something as a team, and many reported that there is increased confidence to execute such real life projects. So for society, again, this website that got created was a outcome. For ET researchers, there were papers, a bunch of people wrote papers on it. And for instructors, so the big deal was there was sustained learner interest and engagement in the content. So if people are there in the class and engaged, we don't have to really worry so much about learning, right? It happens. And then there were multiple types of student learning. It was not just one topic that I want to teach, or I have a idea that, okay, this is the topic that they need to learn. So there were multiple types of student learning. We contributed to society, and we had a blast. Okay, it was great fun to orchestrate this course and think from one class to the next. So decisions would keep getting taken dynamically, how to structure it, what to do, and so it was great fun. Okay, so at this point, the main message of this work is that in practice-oriented courses, learning of conceptual knowledge is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Okay, so students need to apply their skills, and that too in an authentic setting. And one way to make this happen is to do this project-based learning with real-life clients and stakeholders and get diverse cohorts of students to participate. Okay, so create buy-in for diverse cohorts and let them participate. So this is the main takeaway from this experiment. So there are lots of detailed slides. So part A is about more detail about how the course was structured. Part B is more details about how well the project was carried out, more data on what the users feel. Part C was more about the research studies that we did, and I'm going to skip all of them. So what I will talk about is some model which has actually emerged out of this, which is part D, where we talk about how could this be replicated. So what is the model really? So the model is create cohorts and groups. So if you want to do practice, or if you are teaching a practice oriented course and you want your students to learn from a real life project, then create cohorts with different learning objectives for each of the cohorts. Okay. So the credit students learn the content, the senior students learn to mentor, and the super senior students learn to teach and make connections across topics. I mean, this is not very strict, right? So sometimes it's the junior students also who make connections across topics, but broadly these are the learning objectives. And they have their own roles assigned in the project. So the junior students are the ones who are expected to execute. So for example, all the review meetings, it would be only the junior students who present. Okay, none of the senior students ever made a presentation in the course. So the junior students would present, get feedback from everyone and go ahead. Okay, so it was their decisions largely. Then again, for senior students, I've already said, their basic role is mentoring, making sure that the project stays on track, scoping, making sure that we don't have too much scatter in the execution, provide direction, and so on. So now the idea is to have 2 or 3 of these junior students along with 1 or 2 of the Y cohort and maybe 1 person of the Z cohort in your class. Okay, so that is one part of the model, to create cohorts and groups in this way. Then the second thing to do is for the instructor to create collaborative learning activities. So this is a long list of what could be done, but it basically goes back to what I said earlier, that we have to cultivate initial enthusiasm for the course, create some meaningful activities, and support cross-cohort collaboration. So that's the second step. The third step is to ensure shared action and reflection. So this is a very important step. So we want everybody to collaborate not just on the project but even in their thinking. Okay. So in class, what we had was a slide deck basically. It was a shared Google slide deck. So in which for every activity the students had to write their responses into that deck. Okay. So sometimes it would be individual responses, sometimes it would be group responses. So the first question we started off in that deck was this question of why is it important to write class responses publicly? Okay, so the students themselves then figured out that there's a lot of peer learning that happens. I can get to know what other people are saying, and then maybe I missed a point, somebody else has made that point, so things like that. So all of these the students themselves realized on day 1, and subsequently there was no reluctance to participate in this way. So creating this in-class shared document where they write responses, and as a group make them present ideas and get feedback from others. Okay. Similarly, ensuring this shared action and reflection after class is also important. So individually, like I already mentioned, there was a shared doc in which everybody would write their reflections. So that was called the homework 0, and then there were people, so you can see on the slide, so there were n number of students who wrote something, and then there is feedback from one of the senior students to one of the junior students, there's feedback from the instructor saying something, etc. So this also helped a lot of the online students to participate more effectively. And the out of class action is working on the group project where they are executing. Okay. Now comes a very interesting part of this model, which is a contract. Okay. So this is very crucial. So because there's a very diverse set of people, we don't want people vanishing from the class. Then the whole project collapses. Okay. So early on, we came up with this idea of contracts, and this was the contract for the instructor. Okay. So cohort X was the main one, the ones who are taking it for credit. So they were the main audience, and the goal was that at no time will their learning be compromised. Okay, so if at any time we felt that they are going to get compromised or they are getting overwhelmed or they're not following, the idea was that we'll drive everybody out of the class and go back to a standard class. Okay, so luckily for us, we didn't have to do that. Okay. So their learning was not compromised, and I also said I will try not to give you more work than the allocated credits for the course. So I'm sure some of them will disagree with that, but considering that there were seniors also who put in time, I think it is kind of not too much. Okay. Then the idea was for cohort Y that you will get enough out of this course. Okay. You will learn mentoring, you will gain some confidence to execute these large projects, okay, and your knowledge will deepen a bit more. Okay. And for Z cohort was actually, they were totally self-motivated. So all I had to do was that, look, you'll find it interesting to participate, and I don't think anybody from that cohort ever bunked. Okay, so people were online, people were in class, so they were there all the time. And my contract was that I will do my best to ensure that appropriate learning happens for all the cohorts. And to a large extent, I think this was achieved. Okay. So this is the other interesting one. This is the contract for the cohort X. Okay. So one was that you will attend all classes in person on time, which happened, which was the interesting part, which one expects that this will not happen, but it happened. Okay. Then the other one was you will participate in all activities diligently. This also happened. Why? Because they had buy-in. Okay. And because they were in groups where there were seniors who were, so I didn't have to call anyone and say, hey, why aren't you in class today? Okay. It's a small class, 25 student class. So I didn't have to call up anybody and say, why aren't you in class? And the third one was that, focus on real learning of the subject. Okay. You will not pester the instructor regarding marks and grades. Okay. So it turned out that again, none of that happened, and all the students did well in the course. So similarly, there is a contract for cohorts Y and Z. So for Y is that the contract is that, you will attend most of the classes and do most of the activities, and they were to participate in the project at the design level. Okay. So the main thing that I asked of these two Y and Z cohort people was that they will not vanish from the course suddenly. Okay. Or they will not, so if you miss a day, that's okay. But if you suddenly vanish, once you have created groups and responsibilities have been assigned, and then if you vanish from the course, then the rest of the group collapses. So this was again an important part of the contract, and we said that, look, if you cannot meet this contract, we had a floating population. We had one, floating population of Y and Z people who could participate as and when they came to class. But there were a few committed, so you need a few people at least who will commit, as many as the number of groups at least. So luckily again that was there. There were a sufficient number of people who were committed from cohort Y and cohort Z to participate in the course. Okay. So now this is nearly the end of the talk, and this is actually open for discussion from here on. So how to repeat this, how to make this model go beyond this one course. Okay. So the idea is that we have two courses. Okay. So one course is on learning the subject, and another course is on learning to mentor. Okay. And you have different goals and credits for different cohorts. So let's say I am the instructor. So I teach let's say I am teaching an engineering course. Okay. So let's say I am teaching networking. So I teach networking to third year BTechs. And at the same time, I'm also teaching network project management or something more about mentoring to the MTechs. Okay. So I put both of them into the same course, in the same slot, in the same, the same, not in the same course. They are doing different courses, but maybe the MTechs will be doing a 2-credit course, the BTechs may be doing a 4-credit course, something like that. Okay. So this is the example of cohort X is, if it's a PG elective class, it is, and if it's not a very large elective, so I can't authoritatively say that it will work for 80 student class, but I'm quite confident that one can make it work for a 40 student class. Okay, so if you say that cohort X can be the first year MTech students who are learning the subject, Y can be a subset of the second year MTechs and the PhDs who are working in that area, who are familiar with the subject and now they're learning the next thing, how to teach, how to mentor and so on. And cohort Z can be the students who are about to graduate. We don't need too many of the cohort Z's in your class, we just need one per group. So they could be the 4th year PhDs who are learning to teach the courses. Okay. So I have some anecdotal experience from a networking course taught long ago, but we did not have this extra credit course. So I just had this bunch of cohorts. We went to a rural area, we built a network for them, and then we came back. So it's not impossible to do. In a UG class, somewhat wishful thinking that we could have, the cohort could be the second year BTech, let's say you're teaching an algorithms course, and cohort Y could be the 4th year BTechs or the MTechs who know a lot more about the subject. Now they're together building some, maybe participating in some hackathon type of competitions and learning, and cohort Z could be a subset of the PhD course. Okay. And finally, I mean, this is just an idea, that suppose we were to do it at a school level. Okay, how could it be done at a school level? Okay, so the idea is that if we have a timetable where we have, see, schools run on timetables, and if we have a timetable where there are some classes in which there is this mix of integrated set of, so 5th standard, 6th standard and 7th standard will attend this class together, and the topic is, let's say, environment. So they are all doing that, but they are doing it at different levels, and then it's possible that we could do that. Okay, so that's about it. That's the talk. Yeah. So we can discuss about this topic.
I was just wondering about the moral responsibility, which to me is very important in any sensitization part of a course. And so I was thinking about, you have 3 cohorts here, and they are clubbed together in terms of their hierarchy of being UG, PG, PhD or postdoc, right?
Yeah.
So if the cohorts were a mix of different levels, how would that impact learning and the cumulative moral responsibility? This is a question that occurred to me, because would it impact the communication that happens between different levels of students in the same cohort? Let's say if there is a mix of X, Y, Z in X. So this was one question that I had. And regarding the previous slide, this is just an observation, maybe it means nothing, but is the cohort Z, I mean cohort Y and Z, if you see the contract is written in bold font for the Y, and for the Z it is kind of less binding. Is it that, or it's just coincident?
So yeah, that's a very good point. So I think cohort Y and cohort Z is the contract less binding on Z. So Z is totally self-driven. Okay, they had no need to come into the course. It did not need to appear on their transcript. They were not auditing. So, and they knew most of the content. So they were coming into the course because they wanted to participate in the project. And because they were the older cohort, like what you said, moral responsibility, they had, it was found that they had more of the moral responsibility. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah. And coming to this other question of yours about the treating the topic with sensitivity and being morally responsible, for a sensitization topic. Again, at least it's my my feeling that because we had this cross cohort, there was a lot of richness of dialogue, okay, which led to increased sensitivity for everyone. Okay, so if it were, for example, only a same cohort, okay, so it doesn't matter which grade. So if it were the same cohort, maybe a few people would be sensitive. Maybe the majority opinion is what would drive the decision making. Okay. In this case, because of the senior people who are there in the thing, so even if it's outlier voices were heard, basically they ensured that outlier voices were heard in the discussion. So that I think brought up, so many of them said, no, we also developed empathy towards our own colleagues. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go.
Sir, actually, in such a instructional model, I believe the kind of flexibility the instructor has or require is high. Flexibility in terms of content delivery, design, trying to trying to prepare the students or the entire project to be in the line of the objective, etc. So, like, how do you think an instructor who is an instructor, if I'm an instructor, like, how much preparedness do I need to make when compared to the normal course to implement such a system?
Okay, so there are two questions here. So one is, as an instructor in IIT, I already have tremendous autonomy. Okay, so structuring the course is, it's kind of my prerogative, and almost no one questions me on how I structure my course. I'm expected to be the expert on that. Okay, so this is not true everywhere. So that is one point. Now, if this assumption is not true, that I have the freedom to structure the course my way, then you'll have to scale it down. You'll have to say, so I know colleagues in Somaya College who do this project-based learning, even though they have more boundaries to work within. Okay, so it is possible to structure it that way. So the second question is, how much effort does it take to execute such a course? Okay, so it was the first time I was doing it. Was the hardest course that I have taught in 25 years. Okay, so, and it was the first time, but I don't expect to take so much, have to put in so much effort the next time, because now we have figured out the model. I mean, there were a lot of things that I have not talked about, many things that were tried, and then we said, okay, this is not working. In fact, this XYZ looks very neat now. Okay, so when we started out with the contracts, there was some A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on, and everybody got confused. What are these contracts about? And sit through, but I want to do this and all that. Finally, we said it's all a mess, and cleaned it up to say that, okay, let's just have 3 cohorts. So there were a lot of such things which I have learned. So the next time round, I don't anticipate that it will be so hard, but this time it was a lot of work, especially because there were 2 goals. So see, if you want to do the project, that's fine. You just hire a bunch of project staff and you can execute that. You can create the website. Okay. If you want students to learn these concepts, again, that can be done in your standard ways. Okay. So it's not like these students have learned something far greater in terms of content. Okay. They have learned about the same as far as those topics are concerned, but they've learned some additional things, right? So the challenge is to make sure that neither gets compromised when you are trying to execute both. So like I said, so often it would be 4 a.m. when you are scrambling to give some comments to some or feedback to something that somebody has done, and actually it pays off in a lot of ways. So when students see that the instructor is up at 4 a.m. writing comments into homework 0 document, okay, the next class I don't have to plead with them to write something into it. Automatically a lot of people write. So that's what happened.
So here we had 3 cohorts with different learning expectations. So how did you ensure the formative assessment of these diverse cohorts? Also, about the TA support, do we need TAs from all these cohorts? for facilitating the entire learning process?
Okay, so very good questions. So one is, how did you ensure formative assessment for all the cohorts? So for cohort X, it was simple. Okay, it was the standard thing. So there were assignments, there were project submissions, and so on. So cohort X, there was no challenge in doing either the formative or the summative assessments. Okay, for cohort Y, there was really no summative assessment. They were auditing the course and they had to be part of the project. Okay, so formative assessment was in terms of giving feedback. So I mean, I won't say that really there was a very structured formative assessment. Okay, so cohort Z would so a lot of learning by observation. Cohort Z would say something, instructor would say something in a group project meeting. So these group projects used to be happening in different rooms. So instructor would go into the room and say something, and that's how the formative thing was happening. For cohort Z, I made one attempt at creating one activity only for cohort Z and getting them to do that. But it got too much for me. I mean, I just didn't find the time to do the entire course and make them do that activity. So their activity at that time was to plan a course. So plan a course, what will you teach in the course? So they all did it fairly diligently, but I did not have time to go back and discuss with them their plan. Okay, so cohort Z were kind of left to themselves. Okay. You had another question about the TAs. Okay, so all of cohort Y and cohort Z were my TAs. Unofficially. Officially there was one TA. There were 4 RAs who were doing observations in the class. Officially there was one TA, and but all of cohort Y and cohort Z were my TAs. So anybody would get up and respond, anybody would bring up a new point. That was easy.
So, sir, as you already mentioned that it was your first time also that cohort-wise we are doing. So, how do you ensure the motivation throughout the project, especially for cohort X? Cohort X was credit students, so they have a motivation for marks and other things. But for the cohort Y and Z, as an instructor, how you ensure that they are equally motivated?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So even I have wondered about that, as to how is it that there was no attrition even in cohort Y and cohort Z. Okay, a lot of it I think goes to their own intrinsic personalities. So that's the type of students we are recruiting in our department. Students who have strong service oriented attitude and moral responsibility that if they take up a task, they will complete it. Because I can't say that I did anything very specific to ensure that they don't leave. So I created enough of this. It was interesting. The interest in the project was maintained at a reasonably high level throughout. Okay, but that alone does not account for the fact why were so many of these cohort Y and cohort Z's persisting with the course. So it goes back to their own intrinsic drive to say that, look, I want to contribute to creating this website, and I have taken up this responsibility to be part of this group, so I am going to do it.
So I would like to take this inspiration to the classes which I will also be doing it over there. Want to see, like in our cases we do not have TAs or
Can you
RAs.
just introduce yourself? Over there is where?
Okay, so I am teaching in an AFT Kannur. Over there I am teaching courses related to the design, where I have a class of 35 students, and these are planned according to the curriculum. So we would have discussions based on the projects that we undertake during the course of also. It spans a semester,
Okay.
and we usually will not take it further to the next semester also. So far we have not tried it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, because the faculties will also change sometimes. Okay, so in this case, I like the model which you have suggested of having cohort X, cohort Y, cohort Z. I think it will apply over here because we have few number of students who are motivated enough to work on certain kind of projects, and they are going to help also because they are going to be remaining here for supporting each other. So, but in the case of other spaces where we do not have that kind of community, where the 35 students will be there as part of the course, and then they have multiple such courses also running parallelly, and they do have some challenges also. So it is not easy for faculty to create cohort like we have got it here, but then how do we plan it? Like you have said about school students also. I think that can be an inspiration for me also to take it over there.
Yeah, so I'm not claiming great deal of generalizability here. Okay, so I'm not saying that all courses can be run this way, nor am I saying that you can do this everywhere for. So there is. So what I'm saying is that maybe you could try it in one course and then see where it goes. And one way of trying that is to have these cohorts and have different incentives. Like going back to the previous question, so if there were a different course which cohort Y and cohort Z had registered for, let's say you call it a course on mentoring and project management or something like that, which is not directly part of your curriculum. Today they go to other departments to take such courses and they learn that in more abstract form. Now they're learning the same thing, mentoring and project management, in context. Okay, so if you create another course for them and you are the same instructor who is offering both the courses to this huge cohort, then it's doable. Now if there are 3 such courses that run simultaneously, then it won't work for cohort X. Okay, so they will get smashed. So what you need is the course instructors to then coordinate in some manner and make a bigger project. So there's a lot of coordination required. So like for example, one of the small coordinations that we did last year was that I exchanged one class with another instructor so that I got 3 hours and he got 3 hours contiguous. Both of us wanted 3 hours contiguous. Okay, so that was a small coordination. Okay. Yeah, so if it's a large project, you have to coordinate with other instructors and say that, okay, this semester I am going to do my project, you put your thing into mine, or you do it next semester. So that kind of thing has to be done. We can't have students doing multiple such projects in the same semester at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, sir, I can see that interest was one of the major, what you can say, factor which led to this course happening and students achieving their goal, whatever they set out to be. Let's say, and so as speaking from my personal experience, I would say that why the interest was there because of the topic that we've chosen. Let's say in the second running of the course, if the topic topic is something else and the interest starts dropping or interest isn't there for the topic, what would you suggest in such cases? What the instructor should do apart from scaling down or let's say taking the exit at different levels?
Yeah, so that was going to be my answer, taking the exit. But so let's see. So see, one thing is to find this real life project. So there were many real life projects in IITB which I could have found for this course. Okay. For example, let's say training academic office staff on procedures. Okay, so that's a good training problem to have. And that would also serve this real life perspective, and it also had this client and all that. But it may not have had that strong a connect for the students. So here there was a personal connect for the students, right? Many people, either they had some relative or they knew of somebody or they had a friend, so they were familiar with the need for creating this PWD awareness. Okay, so that actually was the big win in the course, where finding, so for me it was basically serendipity. Okay, as PWD cell member, I was to create something and I said, okay, fortuitously it happened that I could use the course to create that. Okay, so if let's say we have to do this course again after a year or so, you would go looking for some such topic. So I can say what the characteristics of the project should be. So it should be real life, there have to be stakeholders, and students have to be able to see that, okay, this is actually live over there. I am not doing a toy project, my thing matters, therefore doing it well matters. Okay, so that's one thing. And the second thing is they have to be able to identify, emotionally, there has to be some emotional involvement in the project. It cannot be for some stakeholder. It has to be like, okay, in my wing I have 2 people who can benefit from this. So there has to be that kind of a investment. Yeah. All right. Thank you.